Where does the hymn come in? Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Door County on this Halloween weekend. My name is Jan Freistack, and it's my honor to be your service leader today. This fellowship is a place where we come to learn more about being human, more about being in relationship together, how to listen, how to be vulnerable, how to forgive, and how to grow in compassion for one another. Everyone is welcome. At this time, we invite visitors and those returning after an absence to introduce themselves and tell us where you're from and perhaps what brought you here today. Please stand if you're comfortable, raise your hand, and Bob will bring the mic to you. A special welcome to Reverend Phil Sweet, who will be our speaker today. More about that later.
Good morning. My name is Lindsay Knobloch, and I am Jan and Phil Freistack's youngest daughter. Not that young, but in our family, I am. I live in Lake Barrington, Illinois, and I'm up here visiting. Normally, my husband would be with me, but he's helping his sister who has 6 children. So I opted to come up here and relax with my parents. I've heard a lot about this fellowship for the time that my parents have been coming, and I'm glad to be here today to witness it myself, especially knowing my mom is the service leader. And I look forward to chatting maybe with some of you afterwards. So thanks for the welcome.
I would like to introduce my introverted friend, Cheryl, who's here for the first time. She's living down in Sturgeon Bay. She's been there about 1.5 years, right? She's a wonderful poet, and you'll all hear her at the Dickinson sometime in the spring, probably.
Welcome.
Later.
Yeah, we're going to do announcements if that's everyone that wants to introduce themselves. Sure. Any announcements?
Sure.
I've got the mic. I'll get it over with. I'm just the witch incognito today. That's my new introduction. But with a line from Phil, God is trickster, it lets a lot of leeway with picking music. So thanks for the indulgence. I found it interesting that the composer Charles Gounod had studied to be a priest and gave it up in lieu of becoming a composer of operas and lighter musical fare. So to me, that was an interesting trick in his own life. So.
Any other announcements?
This is one part joy, one part announcement. The joy is everyone who was at the auditorium last night shares in my joy, and what a wonderful performance by Door County and Memphis musicians paying homage to Sister Rosetta Tharpe. And the announcement part is part of our Blues, Roots, and Hoots series. And this coming weekend, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th, we have 3 nights of great entertainment. The Friday night is Joey Alexander. He's a 19-year-old jazz virtuoso. Awesome. He'll be performing for students earlier in the day. Saturday, double bill of Liz Wright, a Chicago blues vocalist, beautiful woman, along with Bobby Rush. So kind of new and old blues there. And then Sunday, we have a free screening of an award-winning documentary called Stay Prayed Up. That follows the gospel and Appalachian roots music. And it will be hosted by Phil Cook, who's a Wisconsin boy. He's a frequent collaborator with Justin Vernon of Bon Iver. And that's a free one. We'd love to see you guys, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Let's just have a bender of great blues and roots music.
I'm Kathy Little. I haven't been here for a while, and I just wanted to say that I have a new, another piano duet player with me. Craig has always been my partner, but now I have Sandy Stoneham and I are now calling ourselves the Door Duo. And we've had 2 successful concerts, and now we want to share our fun of playing together to come here. And we've been given the date December 10th afternoon at 1:30. So it's not too early to put a December date down. And we have a large range of composers that we play. And then Craig is our MC. He will be playing fun music as you come in. And then he also tells a little bit about each composer before we play them. So mark down December 10th.
Okay. Any other announcements? Thank you. Please remember to silence your phones, and if you have difficulty hearing at any time, just raise your hand and we'll adjust the volume. Following the service, please join us in the gathering room for refreshments, and then our talkback session will convene later here in the sanctuary when you hear the chimes. All righty. As we light this chalice today, we are reminded of the beauty and the power of balance and contrast in our lives. It is darkness that makes the flame of a single candle so powerful, and light that deepens those shadows in return. The chalice flame is a meeting point, the union of the incredible beauty of darkness with the warmth and assurance of light. May our chalice lighting this morning remind us that we are stronger together in all the complexities of relationship because we are different and because together we are made whole. Join us in singing hymn 38.
Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise for the springing, fresh from the word. See the rain to fall, sunlight from heaven, like the first dew fall on the first grass. Praise for the sweetness of the red garden, strong in completeness where God's feet pass. Mine is the sunlight, mine is the morning, born of the one light, Eden someday. Praise the elation, praise every morning, God's recreation of the new day.
Please join in the unison affirmation and doxology. We gather together to seek knowledge and wisdom, to explore freely the vast reaches of mind and spirit, to celebrate within a caring community those truths, ancient and modern, which give meaning and direction to our lives.
From all that dwell
be seated. We find our joys are amplified and our concerns are lessened by sharing them. Please keep in mind that the service is live and saved on the internet, and do not share about another person unless you've been given permission. And Bob will bring you the mic.
My joy is that I finally have my own roof over my head. I am now a resident of Sturgeon Bay, and in addition to that, have now a 40 to 45-minute commute to work, which harkens back to my Chicago days, but it's a much more pleasant drive than on the Chicago freeway, so I'll get used to it. It's all good.
Thank you. My joy is my son Wyatt finished football season as a freshman and got all conference honorable mention for his defensive end work. So,
Wow.
Hi, with permission of Jerry Friedberg, she's been in hospital all week, and we're not exactly sure when she'll be coming home. That's Jerry Friedberg, and her cell phone may or may not be working, so please just call the Door County Hospital number and ask for her room. She would love to have a few hellos. Thank you.
Well, my joy is that we have Phil Sweet here. I knew that I should have come earlier because the parking lot would be not just full, but I had to park on the grass. Anyway, this is just a wonderful thing that he has come to see us and talk, because we always enjoy, obviously, his talks.
I just want to remind everyone that we do have a poet speaking on Wednesday night here for the Dickinson series, and it's Anne Lindquist, and she has a mountain of work and teaches writing over the internet to thousands of people. So it'll be interesting to hear her poetry this week.
So, another shooting this week. This one's personal. Lewiston, Maine is my hometown. I called my brother on Wednesday evening just to check in. He said, I'm sitting in my living room. I've got all the lights in the yard turned off, and I have my rifle by my side. Although what a 30-30 lever action hunting rifle will do against a rapid fire assault weapon that leaves its victims unidentifiable, I don't know. To walk into a civil gathering and open fire at random is insanity. To fail to vote for a measure that would have removed these weapons from this man's possession when he entered a mental health institution in July is insanity. To stand before the nation and say that now is not the time for this conversation is insanity. To suggest that the only solution is to arm every citizen with a loaded weapon so they can defend themselves against random acts of violence is insanity. I hold in my heart and in my tears all those who have suffered loss this week, this year, this decade, this century. And I pray to God that we can find the wisdom to overcome our insanity.
Thank you, Mark. And finally, it's my special joy today to introduce our speaker. The Reverend Phil Sweet, a retired UCC minister and longtime friend of our congregation, is a man I'm told needs no introduction. But as I'd never met him until this morning, I asked him to share a bit about himself, and this was his response. Several years ago, Sue Leader, an active member of the fellowship who died recently, was the service leader for me one Sunday. She had grown up in the Sister Bay Baptist Church. She introduced me by telling a story of when she was in high school. They encouraged the youth of the church to visit other churches in the area to further their religious education. But if they came to Hope UCC Church in Sturgeon Bay, where I was the minister, they had to have a chaperone. And I think that gives us a foretaste of the feast to come. Now it's time for our offertory. We give to remind ourselves of how much we've been given and that we're part of something bigger than ourselves. If you're visiting for the first time, your presence is gift enough. And you can also give online. It's listed in your bulletin. Thank you. And now a moment of quiet to center our minds and hearts so that we can receive today's message. Now it's time for Reverend Sweet.
I'm always reminded of the Quaker adage, you only speak if you can improve upon the silence, which is always an intimidating adage for me. Well, as many of you will remember, George and Martha are two hippopotamuses who are friends. So I have two stories from James Marshall's writing. One is called The Scary Movie. Martha was nervous. She had never been to a scary movie before. Silly goose, said George. Everybody likes scary movies. I hope I don't faint, said Martha. But Martha enjoyed the scary movie. This is fun, she giggled. She noticed that George was hiding underneath his seat. I'm looking for my glasses, he said. You don't wear glasses, said Martha. At the end of the scary movie, George was white as a sheet. Here, he said to Martha, take my hand. I don't want you to walk home being afraid. Thank you, said Martha. The second story is called The Book. George got all nice and cozy. May I join you, said Martha. I'm reading, said George. I'll be quiet as a mouse, said Martha. But in no time at all, Martha started to fidget. Please, said George, have some consideration. I'm sorry, said Martha. And George went back to reading, but in no time at all, Martha started fidgeting again. That's it, he said. And he took his book and he went home. He opened up his book, getting nice and cozy, and was reading. It's important to be considerate of your friends. Sometimes you are unthinkingly not thinking about them. Martha should read this book, said George, and he went to find her. I'm sorry, said Martha, I was fidgeting. I was lonely. I never considered that, said George. What did you want to see me about? Oh, nothing, said George. I got lonely too. And they sat up long into the night telling stories to one another, and Martha didn't fidget at all. So I have not been here for a long time. I went through a depression that I could not get out of. I felt unworthy. I felt that my life had not amounted to anything. And this went on for a long period of time, and nothing I did was able to get me out of it. So in the long run, my family and a group of men friends and my physician helped me to get back to about the place where I was before I started to be depressed. But I can tell you that I have a deep appreciation for people who suffer from depression and who find no way out of the place they find themselves in. So I'm happy to be here this morning. A place that I have learned to love this congregation as I learned to love the congregation that I served for many years in Sturgeon Bay. So this is a test in a way if I can actually do this to my satisfaction. So I have two readings this morning, and in a way, if you think about this reading, it can be very funny. So I hope you will take it in the manner in which it is presented. It's a period in Jesus's life when he is exorcising demons from people. The Catholic Church has several exorcists, trained members of the priesthood, to exorcise demons from people who believe in them. And this is from the New Jerusalem Bible translation. When an unclean spirit goes out of a person, or we could say when a symptom or bad habit is cast out or attempted to get rid of, it wanders through waterless country looking for a place to rest. It says, I will go back to the home I came from. But on arrival, finding it swept and tidy, it then goes off and brings 7 other spirits more wicked than itself. And they go in and set up house there, so the person ends up worse than before. So you could say you cannot just cast out your demons and they just get irritated and find other like-minded friends and come back and visit you again. And then from Rumi, the 13th century Sufi scholar and poet, it's called the guest house. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight, the dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them all at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Say, I am you. Now, I want to just give you a little prologue this morning before I begin to speak about what I initially intended to do. Halloween, or the eve of the hallowed day, is followed by All Saints' Day and then All Souls' Day. In Europe, people would go to the graves of the people they had loved and had died, and they would bring prayers and recollections and little gifts. And the gifts are a little secret psychological part to the whole piece. When someone you love dies, there's almost always a sense of regret and guilt about the death. In Christianity, we call it the sins of omission and the sins of commission. That is, the things that we wish that we had done for the loved one and didn't do, and the things that we did do that we wish that we had not done. And that's where the sense of the fear of the dead comes from. In ancient times, people believed that the spirits of the dead were able to possess the spirits of the living. So they would dress themselves all in black, trying to disguise themselves so that they wouldn't get possessed. So that's where the whole understanding of black as the color of mourning comes from. Women who wear veils of black, men and women in Europe who often you will see with black armbands. So in Catholic Europe, the people went to the graves. But in the Celtic world from which we get Halloween, they believed that the dead came out of the graves and went back to visit the homes where they had lived. And if you had treated them well, they brought you a gift. And if you had treated them poorly, they brought you a trick. So that's where this whole understanding of trick and treating comes from. In 1886, Robert Louis Stevenson wrote a little mystery novel. He said he had been trying to find a way to express the dual nature of what it means to be a human being. And the vehicle came to him in a dream one night, according to his autobiography. And the title of the book was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Dr. Henry Jekyll is a handsome, cultured physician in his 50s. But there's something in his being that he can't get at, some part of his personality that makes him unhappy and unable to express this part of his personality. So in his lab, he creates a little experiments for a while and then comes up with a drug that when he takes it, he becomes a totally different person and a totally different, what do I want to say, the way of being in the world. His appearance changed into that of Mr. Edward Hyde. Mr. Hyde was smallish, much more youthful. He carried with him a sort of an evil sense of an evil personality. He's a person that you would immediately dislike if you found him on the street. But when Dr. Jekyll took the drug, he felt lighter and happier in his body and 10 times more wicked. Now, we don't know until the end of the novel that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde are, in fact, the same person. He has a room in a building in the seedy section of the city, which is the back of the beautiful home that Dr. Jekyll's home faces on a different street. So in the beginning, the behavior of Mr. Hyde is just indignities, and then they become more sinister, and then they become criminal. And then another problem arises. Dr. Jekyll goes to bed as Dr. Jekyll, and he gets up in the morning as Mr. Hyde, and he hasn't taken the drug. So he has to take the drug in reverse. And finally, it gets all mixed up. Things get out of control, and he thinks to himself, he has to choose one or the other. And it's a very difficult decision because he's attracted to both personalities. So for 2 months, he's a better than average Dr. Jekyll. He's kinder, he's more open, he's more generous, he's more social. But all the while, he is tortured by the longings of Mr. Hyde, who is seeking to be free. In the end, he can't tolerate it any longer. He takes the drug and becomes Mr. Hyde again, killing a prominent member of the society, brutally beating him to death. So Dr. Jekyll realizes he can't become that anymore, or he'll be arrested for murder. Finally, the drug wears out, and by his own hand, he takes his own life. Now, we are all a part of that mix of good and light, death and birth. But most of the time, we keep it in some degree of balance. But in this particular case, the tension of the balance is lost, and thus ends the unhappy life of Dr. Jekyll. Now, when you attempt to live in a righteous, pure kind of fashion, perfection, if you want to use that term, I've often thought if Jesus actually said be perfect, he was having an off day. Even prophets have off days. When you attempt to live in that kind of lifestyle, there's a counterbalance that occurs on the other pole of your being that becomes compulsive and threatening and uncontrollable. Christianity spends a lot of time with the issue of evil. And it's in part because it has so much emphasis on the light side of life. Some of you might remember many years ago, Jimmy Swaggart, the TV preacher who would pound the pulpit on Sunday about righteousness and then be found talking dirty to the prostitutes in the seedier section of the city. It's perfectly and an understandable part because of this emphasis on the positive things in our life rather than the recognition of the negative. So in the Hebrew Bible, in the book of Job, God and Satan are in communication with one another. Satan is a part of the court of God. They have this dialogue that goes on between them. We have often cut that off. So Satan becomes the inquisitor of God, to keep God on his toes, to ask the unhandy, the things you want to keep below the surface, like a jester in the court of a king. So I have on a number of occasions talked to you about the trickster. The trickster is a mythological figure. That's important to understand this. It's a mythological figure that begins in our own psyches. It's part of our own being. And the trickster's function, Joseph Campbell, the great mythologist, called them themes of the imagination. The trickster is that part of God that is continually breaking down ideas and images of how we think the universe operates. And they come sometimes as human figures, sometimes as divine figures, sometimes as animal figures like coyote and rabbit and raven and spider in the Native American traditions or in African folk tales. The Ethiopian god Edshu goes on a walk one day and he wears a hat that's red on one side and black on the other. So the farmers on one side see one color and on the other side a different color. When he gets to the end of his walk and he's going home, he turns the hat around so they still see the same color on his hat. When they get together at the end of the day, the farmers all get talking about how nice it was to see Edshu walking through the fields with his red hat. Oh, no, he had a blue hat on. And in the middle of this big quarrel, suddenly Edshu appears, laughing uproariously. My greatest joy, he says, is creating strife. Then there are at least 100 or 200 stories of Nasruddin, the Sufi trickster god. He gets arrested for mixing horse meat with his chicken cutlets. At the trial, the judge asks him what the proportions were. He said 50-50. After the trial, a friend of his came to Nasruddin and asked him what he meant by that. He said, 1 horse to 1 chicken. So Lewis Hyde, in his book, Trickster Makes the World, says, culture requires that there be space for figures whose function is to uncover and disrupt the very things that culture is based on. And the third Zen patriarch said, the great way is not difficult for all those who have ceased from cherishing opinions. And Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist, in 1961, in the last interview he did before he died, said this: to this day, God is the name by which I designate all things which cross my willful paths violently and recklessly. All things which upset my subjective views, plans, and intentions, and change the course of my life for better or for worse. The human journey is not a straight line thing. It's up and down and around and right and left. 3 steps forward, 4 steps backward, but you're going to get to heaven anyway because you've been going in the wrong direction. Rumi says, every human being is half weak and wrong and off the path. and the other half is dancing in the invisible joy. Now, Joseph Campbell, I've been a great fan. I know some of you found the series The Power of Myth with Bill Moyers in fact, it was one of the most watched productions that PBS produced. He says everybody is on a path to becoming a hero, and the hero is the path of every day finding more wisdom than you had the day before, the discovery of wisdom for each of us. And he says there are 3 parts to that. Number 1 is the beginning of the journey. You realize something about your life is not going the way you thought it should go. There's certain about dryness that comes in your life. So you then move to the second state, which is the initiation stage, that you find in this journey that you take in your mind deep recesses and power that you didn't realize you had before. And then there's the return. You come back to life and live a different life because of these previously 2 stages of your life. Now, naturally and inevitably, our life runs stale. Too many things coming at us, too much routine. I can tell many of you who are around my age here, this is not the world that you grew up in, not the world that I grew up in. And there are many things that I cannot comprehend and don't comprehend, especially around technological things related to our life. Sometimes it's just one damn thing after another. Difficult and unforeseen circumstances. The death of loved ones, people who lose a spouse that they've lived with for 50 or 60 or more years. So your whole life changes. It's not the same anymore. Accidents and illnesses, a broken relationship, failures in your life, loss of a dream, something you've dreamed about doing all your life, and suddenly you realize it's not going to be done by the time you die. So William Wordsworth wrote, "The world is too much with us, soon and late. Getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. Little we see in nature that is ours. We have given our hearts away, a sordid boon. We are out of touch." Some people believe that at this time of the year, the distance between varying worlds is thinnest. When days are getting shorter, winter is coming, the leaves are falling. And it's a time when the wild things are able to get into our beings. Representing the energy that is neglected and undeveloped and unused, often what is rejected. Remember Mary Oliver in her poem, The Summer Day, what are you going to do with your one wild and precious life? So Halloween is a time to become acquainted with this other side of ourselves. The trickster knows when our lives are getting stale and it wants aliveness and adventure and energy. And he doesn't care at all about your degrees, where you exist in society, how much approval you have had. He doesn't care at all about that. So life is a flow of energy between 2 poles, which are always in tension with each other. Yin and yang, light and death, birth and death. You remember in Ecclesiastes in the Hebrew Bible where the author says, for everything in life there is a season, a a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die. And E.B. White, the writer of Charlotte's Web, said, every day I am confronted with a choice, a dilemma. Do I save the world? Do I attempt to redeem the world? Or do I savor the world? So the more you move in one direction, the more tension is created. And we have to find a way to honor the other side, the unseen, outlived portion of your life. The trickster is a figure who keeps you in touch with the other side. The Jews have a parable called the parable of two pockets. You reach into one pocket and it says, you are the darling of the universe. Nothing is known apart from you. You are the center of it all. But lest you become arrogant, you reach into the other pocket and it says, you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Ken Wilber, the philosopher, says that trying to rid ourselves of negative tendencies would be a great idea if it were possible, but it can't be done. He says that we can only tame evil by making it a friend. Trying to push it away only inflames it. Nietzsche said, beware of casting out your demons, lest you cast out the best that is in you. Rilke said, if my devils were to leave me, I am afraid my angels will take flight as well. And Wilber, in his book, The Spectrum of Consciousness, says, as long as you fight your symptoms, it gets worse. And in part, it gets worse because 90% of our lives are unconscious, that they lie below the surface. So this is the wisdom of the 12-step program. You understand that your problem is greater than you are, and you surrender to it. You allow it to speak to you and align yourself with it. And by that means, you resolve the tension that exists within you. So the primary mission of the trickster God is to create doubt about everything. About yourself, your beliefs, about institutions, about laws, about leaders. And they share the uncanny ability to get out of the difficulties that they get into. They rise out of the dismal conditions they ultimately find themselves getting into, like Jesus and the resurrection. Now, I know that we don't carry much imagination about Jesus as a trickster God, but think about it. He was constantly poking fun at the self-righteousness of the most religious people of his day. He wouldn't have hung out here with us, not at all. He hung out with the flea bags and the outcast in his society. He said to the priest, imagine, the whores are going to get into the kingdom before you do. He said, you have heard it said, but I say unto you, let the dead bury the dead. Get on with your life. In order to find your life, you have to lose it. Those who are first are going to be last. So everything we are, everything we believe, everything about us, about life itself, is going to change. It's going to dissolve and evolve into something different. Everything changes, everything. So the trickster gods come along and tell you, don't take life so seriously. You're a role player, and you get into role playing and take your part. To stop asking the incredible necessity you think of knowing what you're doing and that everything is in control. Richard Rohr, who is I know there may be some people who have been to the Center for Action and Contemplation out in Albuquerque. He's a Franciscan monk who's the director of the center, says there are 5 rules for life. Number 1, life is difficult. Here today, every one of us has more difficulties than we can imagine the other person has. Number 2, you're not very important. Number 3, it's not all about you. Number 4, you're not in control. And number 5, you die. And that's the way life functions. So we play roles, so let's play them. Joseph Campbell tells a little story about when he was in New York trying to find a parking space. He finally finds it, he pulls in, and there's a little boy in a kind of semi-catatonic position standing on the sidewalk next to the car. Campbell says he rolls down his window and the little boy says to him, "You can't park here." Campbell looks around, there's no sign. He said, "Why?" The little boy says, "Because I'm a fire hydrant." And Campbell said he rolls up his window and he left because he didn't want to disturb that little boy's role that he was playing as a fire hydrant. So it's a play. Our role here is to dance. Death will come and life will go on. So quit tinkering with yourself, stop trying to fix yourself up. This is a dance that we ought to be playing with ourselves. Learn to love all pieces of yourself. Mary Oliver says all of her life she has tried to love herself. Isn't that true for all of us? We have all tried to love ourselves. So quit tinkering. Learn to embrace who you are as you are. St. Teresa of Avila, the great medieval mystic, said, "This is the great sin of human life, not adequately loving ourselves." So from witches and warlocks and ghosties and ghoulies and long-legged beasties, good Lord, deliver us. Amen.
Thank you, Phil. And in answer to your question, can you still do this? A resounding yes. Please stand for hymn number 34.
I may speak with bravest heart, and have no gift to all inside. I cannot love, my words are vain, as sounding brass and hopeless gain. Though I may give all I possess, and striving so my love profess, but not begin my love within. The prophecy turns strangely thin. God's Spirit come, our hearts control. Our spirits long to be made whole. Let inward love guide every deed. By this we worship and are free.
We close our service with the words of Austrian poet Rainer Maria Rilke. God speaks to each of us as he makes us, then walks with us silently out of the night. These are the words we dimly hear. You, sent out beyond your recall, go to the limits of your longing. Embody me. Flare up like flame and make big shadows I can move in. Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final. Don't let yourself lose me. Nearby is the country they call life. You will know it by its seriousness. Give me your hand.